Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you're enjoying the conference as much as I am, and been some really fantastic presentations this morning. In fact, I've been really privileged over the last couple of weeks to listen to some really outstanding and inspirational speakers, both at this conference and beyond. And in fact, I've managed over the last week or so to relive the London Olympics, recounted through the recollections of the people who ran it. So about a week ago, Lord Sebastian Coe opened our new student union at Nottingham-Trent and talked a lot about what it took to run the Olympics. And then on Tuesday night, Baroness Sue Campbell came and gave a distinguished lecture at our university about how do you build a winning team in terms of getting Sport UK up to scratch to be able to deliver that third place in the medal tables, and a tremendous turnaround from Atlanta. In fact, if as an aside there, that lecture was recorded, and I would commend that you look at that, because it truly was inspirational. And then yesterday, of course, we heard what it takes to be able to run the technology for an event to the scale and size of London Olympics, and I must admit, I will, for one, would have been terrified by that level of challenge. But for me, there was a really key theme that ran through all of those three talks, which does translate for me very well into what we do as IT directors. And that was really the concept of working hard each and every day to achieve marginal gains. In sport, that really matters. You know, tenths, if not hundreds, if not thousands of a second make a difference. You're probably all well aware of the story of the British cycling team who cart around the country bespoke individual mattresses for their cyclists, because at the end of a hard day in the saddle, what you really need is a good night's sleep. Is that approach going to win you the Tour de France on its own? Probably not. But does it make a difference amongst a lot of other things that you do? You bet it does. And that actually is a really strong driver. That thinking is a really strong driver for what we've been doing at Nottingham-Trent around student data. Let me explain what I mean. We've got 28,000 students, give or take, at Nottingham-Trent, a pretty big institution. And getting on for half of those students come from a widening participation background, with many of them first generation to university. Against that background, we achieve somewhere north of 95% employability and relatively low dropout rates, between 5 and 7%. So when I first started talking about analytics in this area of student attainment and student retention, the university said, well, what are you talking about? We haven't got a problem. And the answer is marginal gains. Because if you look at that the other way around, that number of dropouts is 500 real people. 500 real people who, if they drop out of the university, don't achieve what they could have achieved, are lives which are changed and impacted, or life chances which are denied. So we started to look at analytics in the round, and we looked at how we could get a marginal gain. And what we did is we started with where we were strong. And where we were strong is that we had great data. We spent a lot of time over the last 5, maybe even more years, looking at data warehousing, concentrating on data quality, putting in place first-rate CRM systems, such that we've got one version of the truth, and we're very confident of that. So that was a great strength. And we also had a very talented academy who were very dedicated to supporting students through their journey. So we have very good student support mechanisms. We have a one-stop shop student support mechanism. We have very good tutor mechanisms, and so on and so forth. So it's very, very robust support. And so what we did when we started looking at, well, how can we bring that together, is we said, well, how can we make that data that we collect routinely every day, day in, day out, how can we make that support our tutors even better? And that's where the idea of a dashboard came from. And so what we were looking for was simple tools that allowed and gave insight to our tutors, to give us extra insight. So what we've got then is great data better insight through the right kinds of tools, and our friends at Solution Path were absolutely fabulous in helping us to deliver and design what it is that we needed. And what we're getting out of that pilot, or what we desire out of that pilot, is an early intervention when we detect that students are going off track. Out of that, we hope to drive real attainment, and from that, reduce sort of late interventions like resits and the like. And as a byproduct of that, also improve our retention rate. So what we did, so what we got then is out of the, or what we aimed towards was a dashboard which tied together great data, gives us better insight, the means to intervene, to derive real outcome. So we started a pilot last November, and we recruited 40 tutors and their tutor groups, which amounted to about 500 students or so. We created dashboards in partnership with DTP Solution Path. And we created a dashboard, and then we decided actually we'd see how far that got. So we gave ourselves until June this year to see whether or not this would work. Interesting, during the year, 5 other cohorts of students and their tutors joined the pilots because it was going so well. Looking at what we did then, here's a high-level overview of what we found when we brought together a number of data sets. So we started to measure engagement. And there, as you can see on the slide, there's the profile of people who are highly engaged compared to those who are disengaged in some way. And what that data started to tell us was 2 different stories. One was that actually the students were losing are the people who are low engaged. Nothing startling about that, but we could identify very early now who those students were. The other aspect of that is that those students who struggled, and we had to spend an awful lot of time recovering at the end of the year, also struggled in their second year and in their third year. So weren't perhaps achieving as much as they might achieve. So our aim out of this dashboard is really to move our students up that food chain, to be able to attain as best they can. What we hoped is that we would start to see students who might otherwise have achieved a 2-1 achieving a first, and those who might otherwise have got a 2-2 achieving a 2-1, and so on. And as a byproduct of that, to bring those through who wouldn't have made it at all. So what we did is create an individual student dashboard. This is what it looks like. And what that consists of is a whole load of information that come out of our corporate systems, and the clever bit is that red line. That red line utilises HP Autonomy solution, and what it does is bring together an awful lot of information, analyses that information, and gives us a fairly accurate, about 90% confidence accuracy line of what engagement looks like. We used 1.3 million records to train this model, which included about 4 years worth of back data. We then used another year's worth of data to test that that model worked okay. So underlying that red line then, a number of data sources. One was simply attendance at tutorials. We added to that student use of our virtual learning environment, which we call Now. We also looked at the patterns of submission of assessment work, which we do through electronic means, through a thing called Dropbox within our virtual learning environment. We looked at student activity in libraries, and we incorporated that. We also have a very sophisticated smart card solution at Nottingham-Trent, so we had a lot of data about how students track across our campus, so we used that as well, and academic history. So we brought in all of those data sources, mashed them together, and created that red line. So the simplicity of that red line really, really does belie the complexity of analysis that goes on underneath it. So essentially what we did was we took the data that we already had, and we tried to make a proportionate use of it in being able to support a tutor in supporting students. We also did some extra things as a bit of an experiment. So we put some extra data that the tutors could collect around extracurricular activities amongst the student body through a sort of annual review with students. We took all of that data and we added a facility to be able to alert academics to students who were going off track. And as part of the pilot, we did that for two cases. One was where students weren't engaged for a particular period of time, and the other was academic failure. But throughout the pilot, we've started to refine that, and we're starting to look at creating alerts where, for example, non-attendance in induction is important, or doing the kind of thing that Experian does, if you're familiar with that, where if your credit rating is just fine, they send you an email and say it's just fine, and that means you don't have to log on to the system to check that it's just fine. We did the same sort of thing for this, or we're starting to think about doing the same sort of thing for this, so that our academics know that everything's fine. The last thing we wanted to do with our academics, though, is spam them, because we wanted them to take notice of alerts and to intervene. So, to recap some of that, what we've done is we've taken our great strengths in terms of data quality, we've taken a very robust tutor system, we've provided some insights, and we've given ways of academics being alerted to problems within their tutor groups. We then sort of started to look at, well, how does that work in practice? And so if I give you a few examples. We start to concentrate on the 26% or so of students who were not as engaged as they might have been. They're clearly the students are going to be at risk of early withdrawal. If they don't withdraw, they're also going to be the students who struggle throughout their entire academic career if we don't do something about it. So we started to measure those profiles. So here's an example of someone who didn't get very much beyond welcome week. Now, at that point, the tutor wouldn't even got to know them. They wouldn't necessarily have known that this student had disengaged. So what this system does is it actually starts to prompt much, much earlier than was possible previously that a tutor needs to take some action. A key point about that is that's an individual profile, and that the reasons for that disengagement are as many and varied as the students themselves. So what this is starting to do is to take us beyond the traditional way of monitoring and intervening with students and to drive engagement, which is to look at groups of students. So we're looking at individuals as opposed to groups. Here's another example of a student who started well and then for some reason essentially dropped out. Again, the tutor has a very early opportunity to intervene. And probably, to be fair, would have intervened in that case anyway. Where they might not have intervened is in this case, where a student is performing incredibly well, is very well engaged, and then for some reason goes off the rails. So all of a sudden, there's no engagement, and it would take a while for a tutor to pick that up, especially in a well-engaged or previously well-engaged student. Now, when a tutor intervenes, they have the capability to write a case note within the system, and that's denoted by a green line on the dashboard when that happens, and they can write notes. What we found during the pilot is that this was a very typical profile. So you get someone who's doing okay, they go off track a little bit, the tutor intervenes, and immediately you get an improvement in there. Here's another example of that. This is a student who had too many late nights, started to disengage, thought this university lark was okay, and was brought back on track very quickly by a tutor noticing through the dashboard in here. And noticing in a way that wouldn't have been possible previously, because they wouldn't have had access to the wide range of information that underpins this system. And even if they did, they'd have to do some kind of manual collation of that information to interpret it. So this system makes it incredibly simple to be able to have a view of a student. It's not a silver bullet, though, and what we found is that there are students that go off track, and no matter what you do, they stay off track. And you know what? In a way, that's fine, because what we will have done at that point is everything that we can. Feedback so far then from the tutors who've engaged in all of this is that all of them, pretty much all of them anyway, have used the dashboard at least once a week, and so spend a Friday afternoon just trawling through their students, seeing how they're doing. It's had an absolute minimal impact on tutor workload, which is a key requirement. A third of the tutors in the pilot group intervened with students solely on the basis of information within this dashboard. That's not to say that the other two-thirds weren't intervening, it's just they were intervening in a more traditional way. 83% of tutors, as we say on the slide there, have noted real positive engagement with students. So many tutors have shared the dashboard with their students and have had a really strong dialogue about what it means to engage, what it means to become an independent learner in a university. All of the pilot tutors want to keep the tool, and that's an interesting point, because what we've found is that all of the tutors, as I just said, who've used it really, really like it and wouldn't give it up. Those who haven't rail against it automatically. And so one of the things we're now looking at is how do we engage more carefully with the Academy to describe this solution and the benefits that it brings. Importantly, the students themselves are also reporting that they like this system. They like being supported in this way. A similar sort of thing exists. Students who haven't experienced it automatically think they're not going to like it. As soon as they do, they don't know how they would live without it. Some typical comments. I won't read all of those, but you get the gist. In other words, for the first time, our tutors got all the information they need about a student in one place and don't have to make their own interpretation necessarily about what engagement means, and have all of the ability to do everything they used to do in terms of getting to know students and intervening as they always would. So in other words, driving a marginal gain. We also looked at how much this was going to cost us, because everyone said this would be really, really expensive. Here's a really, really crude calculation. This isn't the real business case, of course, but just on the basis of saving just 10% of those students who would otherwise have been lost to the university, we can make well north of £1 million saving a year just through fees alone. So on top of that, of course, there's all those other things that students bring to the local economy and to the university that we would otherwise lose as well. So while this wasn't our focus is absolutely on student attainment. It's a real benefit that the business case is easy to make. So overall then, we're pretty confident that the dashboard works. We're still tweaking and honing things as we go towards the end of the pilot in June, but we are very confident in what we've seen so far. Its great power is that the visualization in there is really simple. In my time, I've seen loads and loads of dashboards that look like the Starship Enterprise, and they're just too difficult, really too difficult to use. This is simple and straightforward. Shouldn't underestimate how difficult it is to bring that data together, though, and that's where the work in this project really came to. We benefited from great data. There's no doubt that speed of a power project. That's not absolutely essential, though, and I'm sure Solution Path would be absolutely up for helping you to get your data in a better state if it isn't already there. We've had extremely positive reactions from both staff and students. The financial case is really easy to make, so what's not to like? The massive, massive lesson I did learn, though, and I think if there is a takeaway in all of this, is never, ever, ever say to your senior management team that software is cleverer than them. That's something that we had to take a lot of recovering from. So in terms of next step, then, we're so confident we're going to roll out across the whole university. There are other things we want to do. We want to look at access beyond just the tutor and the student. At the moment, it's pretty much locked down to that community, but you could see how this might be used with student services or student finance or whoever. Accommodation, maybe. We're looking at our data feeds, and we're looking at how does this drive, in particular, earlier upload of data, especially around assessments, because we tend to wait for fairly infrequent exam boards and things like that. What can we do to change all of that to get even more marginal gain out of this? We continue to hone the analytics. We're looking at the student interface, and it was interesting, the presentation earlier around Foursquare, because that's exactly where we'd like to take some of this, to give students a mobile view of their own behaviours and allow them to drive that behaviour, to almost gamify all of this. And I guess I quite like the idea of having a mayor of the library. That seems to be a sensible thing to do. And so in future we're looking at how we link this to many of the initiatives within the university. So linked to the higher education achievement record, for example. How is it linked with our flipped learning models, and how can we use that to support both tutors and flipped learning? We're looking at how we might be able to personalise this even further, and how does that play into adaptive learning and systems around all of that. And as just mentioned, can we gamify this in some way? So I hope that in some way gives a bit of insight into the work that we're doing at Nottingham-Trent, and I hope that was of some interest. If you like, I'll answer any questions you've got, but if there aren't any, then I guess coffee beckons. Yeah, we don't actually know yet. We've got the trial run until June. Of course, we won't know for sure until we've gone through the next set of assessments, but we'll be measuring that. That's absolutely the thing we'll be measuring at the end of June, and that will feed back into the whole project around all that. But just to be clear, our main goal is about attainment in all of this, and so we will look at how many students we're saving as a result. But the main measure for us is how many people are we lifting up so that more people than would otherwise be the case get first, and so on and so forth. Yep. No, all of the stuff we've done so far is face-to-face. There's no reason why not. Absolutely no reason why not. Yeah. So, yes. You know what, that was something we really worried about. The question was, how do students feel about being tracked to this level of detail? I suppose the first point I would make is that we're not collecting anything extra or special for this. So this is data we already have. On one level, on a kind of legal level, our students have already signed up to us using that data for those purposes. Now that's a kind of easy thing to say. At a more on a moral purpose level, or an ethical level, we have engaged very closely with students, and certainly the students who are within the pilot. We've explained very carefully what it is that they get out of this. We've engaged with students in any number of ways to explain what's happening around all of this. So, for example, we have our own information systems student group, which is run by one of our placement students who have promoted this to the students and given us really valuable feedback as to what they would accept and what they wouldn't at this point. We work very closely with the student union through what they call their GOATS exercise, which stands for Go Out and Talk to Students, and we get feedback through that kind of mechanism. And I think it's fair to say that the students' jury is still out overall. However, as I said earlier, those who've actually experienced it directly really like it, because what they're getting is in some cases, interventions and support before they even knew they needed it. And that's incredibly powerful, incredibly powerful. Of course, those students who don't need support don't really see any difference on a day-to-day basis. So far, we've had incredibly good support from students. So we're not doing a kind of big brother thing. I think the important thing is about engagement, an explanation and understanding. And in the limit, if a student said to us, I don't want to be tracked in this way, I don't want to be part of the dashboard, in much the same way as you can exempt yourself from NHS records, you could do that. In the same way as a doctor would find it then much harder to treat you, we would then find it much harder to support students. So the students, so far, jury's out, but positive by and large, I think, is how to summarise that. You could see that as a possibility. That's something that if we were going to do, we're doing very close collaboration with the academic staff. It's not something that's necessarily on our roadmap to look at. It's an issue we've faced before in terms of our end-of-module surveys, and so we understand that you have to do that with very great care if you're going to do it. And therefore, we're not doing that at the moment because the benefit we're getting is around improving a tutor-student relationship. But you could see how it could be used that way. We're just not planning to do that at this point. Anything else? Good, okay. Thank you very much for listening. I guess it's coffee time. Thank you.